Hi, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the MarquetteHoops.com basketball show with the great John Dodds, our historian, and our producer, Jason Ruck. I'm Tom Pippins, and we are very, very thankful, of course, to be brought to you again by Moonlight Graham, Modern Dental Benefits. Moonlight Graham, a proud sponsor of this program, and we appreciate Craig Caston. And we welcome to the show another sponsor, Sartori Cheese. Jim Sartori, another one who's just outstanding in the community, and we thank them for being with us. You have another great guest for this edition of the show, John.
Yes, Steve Ashburner from NBA.com, and he'll be on. He covered Marquette as a student for the Tribune, 1976 through 1978. Some of Marquette's greatest teams. He was there covering for the Tribune on the championship season. We'll talk to him about that.
Look forward to going down memory lane here. And as we do, we want to say that Steve is brought to you by Moonlight Graham, Modern Dental Benefits. Moonlight Graham, a proud sponsor of the MarquetteHoops.com basketball show, and Sartori Cheese. We welcome them. Jim Sartori, we appreciate your coming aboard and being part of the team. Here we go.
I want to get into that Final Four run in a second, but just want to talk about some of the players. Butch Lee, the interesting thing is that season really started in Montreal the summer before, 1976, in the Montreal Olympics. I remember I'm watching the Olympics at home, I think it was on ABC, and they said, oh, we have this nobody cares game. The United States basketball team is playing against Puerto Rico, and it's not that big of a deal. And then they said, "Whoa, we got an update." And it went right to about 3 minutes to go live in the game. And Kurt Gowdy was doing the game with Frank Gifford, I think, and he was saying that this game has been nip and tuck all game. There's this guy in Puerto Rico. His name is Butch Lee. He has 35 points, and they can't stop him. And they showed some of the highlights, and I'm at home thinking, that's Marquette's two guard. Mm-hmm. He's never scored more than like 14 points in a game. What is this all about? And I remember attending a Rick Majerus basketball camp, and he said that Butch Lee was as good when he won the national player of the year in 78. He was that good in 74, but he knew his role, and he sacrificed and let Lloyd Walton and Earl Tatum and Bo Ellis get some of the glory. But talk about Butch Lee and that, what you remember about the Olympics.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, that was his coming out. I mean, I think that's when he went from Alfred Butch Lee to just Butch Lee when after that performance for Puerto Rico. And he was born in Puerto Rico, but he stayed there about as long as you or I would on a day in port on a cruise. I mean, he was soon being raised in the Bronx, which is why Al had the connection with him. But I mean, he was, I think it was his build. I mean, he was solidly built. He looked like a football fullback. Big thighs that created all his energy and force, and not all that tall, but could drive into any traffic at the college level, particularly at that point. And really, to me was, Bo was the senior who got the special attention from Al with that senior system. Jimmy Boylan was tough as nails Jersey kid, sort of running the point. But Butch was a tremendous scorer. Not a great outside shooter, but he could get to the rack and he just sort of set a tone. And he was not one of the more colorful guys at Marquette, but just sort of a steady, forceful player that he was up there in the ranks with all those college guards, and there were a lot of good guards back in the late 70s.
I don't know if you were at this alumni event, but in 1981 there was a 100th anniversary of Marquette University, the founding, and it was at Marquette High School. And they brought everybody back. It was the best reunion event ever, from Jim Chones to Dean Meminger. Everybody came back for this. And there was a game going back and forth, and Maurice Lucas was there. And Al was coaching one team and Hank was coaching the other. And Hank and Al were debating who gets the first pick and who the player would be. And Al said to Hank, "Tell you what, you let me take the first pick and I'll let you have the next three." And Hank's looking at the sheet and he's like, Earl Tatum, Maurice Lucas, Jim Jones. He goes, "Yeah, you take the first pick." And Al gets up and says, "Butch Lee." And then he sits down. So in the game, the backboard was broken at one of the ends. There wasn't a breakaway rim at Marquette High, so they ended up playing a half-court game.
Craig Buttram did that. Craig Buttram
were you at the game?
That.
Were you at that event?
I was there.
Okay.
Yep, I remember that.
Craig Buttram took it down, and George Thompson told me later that was the best thing that could have happened because he didn't think he could have lasted or survived any more full court. But there was a move in that game where Butch Lee drove down the left side of the lane and he went up, and Maurice Lucas was on Hank's team and tried to follow him intentionally, and he grabbed Butch and pinned him with a bear hug and pinned both of his arms to his body as Butch went up, and Butch goes like this. Lucas's arms fly off. This is the strongest guy in the NBA, and Butch goes up and lays it up and in, and Maurice Lucas he looks at him, he goes over and he shakes his hand. He goes, "That was amazing." To this day, that was the strongest move I have ever seen on a basketball court. And I saw George Thompson and Dwayne Wade play, but Butch Lee had the strength.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Yeah, and you're right. I mean, Luke was not only the strongest man in the NBA, he was the most feared man in the NBA because, I mean, he was one tough customer. And, that was a regret that I had, that even though I didn't cover the team yet, that he, when he signed, or at least I guess he dealt with an agent, and so he wasn't permitted to come back to Marquette when he had second thoughts, that he was gone when I was a freshman. But yeah, Butch was special. He was a man among boys in terms of his style of play. His last couple of years, he really his whole Marquette career.
Al always thought Marquette has a law school, and if my player wants to receive representation, he's an American citizen. He should be able to talk to an attorney or talk to an agent. And if the NC2A doesn't like it, then we have a law school. We should take him to court. I'm going to call Marty Greenberg over at the law school. We're going to do something there. And that happened a lot in the 70s, where Bob Lackey, I think, was declared ineligible and then reinstated. And then, but if you signed with an agent at the time, you couldn't, you lost your eligibility. Yeah. But as Steve pointed out, Steve, on that, as Marquette went to the Final Four run, their first game was the rematch against Cincinnati in the Midwest tournament, and they played Pat Cummings again. And that was the famous game where they had the fight at halftime with Bernard Toone and Al McGuire came to blows. Yeah. Can you talk about what you saw from that game?
Well, I had to watch that one on television. The budget we had at the Marquette Tribune, it didn't allow me to go there. And I think that one, that was right around Easter break as well. So the single game in Cincinnati, we passed on that. I went to the regional in Oklahoma City and then on to Atlanta. But yeah, I mean, I didn't know about the Toone and McGuire confrontation until after the fact. I didn't really know about the Pat Cummings grudge element to that game. I know Cincinnati was a powerful team, but Marquette blew them out, and so that that was a good start to that 5-game run. But yeah, it was pretty pivotal. I wish I had been in attendance for that first tournament game.
But the next game was probably one of the most memorable games of the McGuire era. Was the St. Patrick's Day game in Oklahoma City against K-State. And talk a little bit about that if you could.
Well, that's a game that it drudged up memories of technical fouls passed for Al. He picked up a technical during that game when he claimed he was only talking to his players. He was talking about Kansas State and said they're choking, and gave us the choke sign. And the rabbit-eared officials, they thought, oh, he's accusing the referees of choking in their performance, and they teed him up. And I remember vividly after that game, and they won it. I mean, they won just by a point. What I remember from the game itself was Jim Dudley, who had been a little used reserve. Al tried to hang a nickname on him to get him a little more attention. The Cloud Piercer, I believe he called him. And but it never really panned out. But Dudley in that game came in off the bench. I didn't even know he was paying attention. Came in off the bench and really helped Marquette down the stretch in that game in the second half for sure. And then after the game, they had this old corrugated steel garage type door that separated part of the arena in Oklahoma City from where you would go in by the floor. And Al got up to the podium, and they turned that power door on, and everybody's waiting because that door, it wasn't quiet with heavy corrugated steel and all. It's lowering. And as soon as that door got all the way down and got quiet, Al went off on the officials, and one of the all-time tirades. I wasn't working with a tape recorder back then. I really wish that I could have had that tape to save it. I know one person who actually has a recording of that rant, and the guy won't share it with me. He's claiming exclusivity, and the only reason he had it is because Kevin Byrne included it on I think they called it the Marquette's actuarial line or whatever it was.
Actuality.
And he had that, on the recorded line. You would call in, and they would have updated info from Marquette. You could always put something fresh in your coverage for people that didn't cover the team in person a lot or didn't have that day's news. And he put it on there, and my friend tape recorded it off that phone machine, and he has it. But I mean, it's one of a kind. I had never heard anything like that. I could not take notes fast enough in my little reporter's pad. I mean, that was I'm not a bum on the street. I'm not a wino in the gutter. Just on and on. I'm good at my profession, and just, it was a stream of consciousness, but it was straight street patter from, the New York kid. And I mean, he called out the officials big time. And I think that probably made the NCAA hyper aware of not to toss McGuire in one of the subsequent tournament games, just, for fear that he had called them out, and he had sort of laid down a marker where, he's not going to go down that road again like it happened, previously. I think, was it the NC State game in '74? He had gotten tossed from a tournament game, and, he didn't want any part of that. And he really just, he made sure it wouldn't happen, as it turned out. But that to me was the story of that night. And my friends and I stole a cake from a Howard Johnson's after the game. So that's my little personal asterisk on that.
Sure. Al had the 2 technical fouls in the 74 championship game. He had a technical foul at the end of the Indiana game the year before. And the players were telling me later that he didn't deserve the technical. He was shouting at a player, and the ref thought he was shouting at him. So they teed him up, and that ended any chance Marquette had of winning that game. So when he grabbed his tie and his throat to say that the tide is turning, we're catching up, they're starting to choke, and he got teed up, he leaned back and Hank told me that he said, if we don't win this game, I'm going to be ridden out of Milwaukee on a rail. And so that's what built up to the tirade. But I remember sitting at home, and you're right about Jim Dudley. Jim Dudley looked like David Bowie. Jim Dudley had the bleach blonde hair, and he and I think it was Mark Lavin. I'm watching the game, and they were looking at some pretty girl in the audience or whatever, not paying attention, as you said. He looked up, and And Hank had told Al that Dudley had been doing really well at practice. Why don't you try him?
Not that Al would know, right?
Yeah, Al was riding his motorcycle around Oklahoma City. So he came back and he's walking down, and Al's looking up and he's doing his Al thing. And all of a sudden he goes up to Dudley and he points at him. And Dudley looks at him and he goes, "Me?" And he gets up and he scores a traditional three-point play, gets a couple of rebounds, creates a spark, that exactly what Marquette needed. And I talked to Jim Dudley at one of the reunions, and he said that Hank told the team that we wouldn't have been there without Jim Dudley. Mm-hmm. So Jim Dudley was touched by that. But then at the end of the game, I've only seen this call maybe twice since, but Marquette was up by 3 points at 77-74, or 67-64, and K-State had the ball, and I'm thinking, no fouls, no fouls. Mike Evans, I think, throws a ball up, and it hits the bracket and goes over Bo Ellis, and Bo jumps up, and the guy comes over the top of him. Bo hits him. They call the foul on Bo, and the guy slaps it, and it goes up and in. And the referee calls basket good, and there's a foul. And I'm at home going, "You've got to be kidding me. I've never seen it like that." And then Al runs onto the court and starts screaming at the ref, and I'm thinking, not only are we going to get tied, we're going to lose because Al's going to get thrown out of this game. And he goes up to the ref and he says something to him, and the ref listens to him, and the ref goes, "You're right." And what he said was, I asked him later, and he said that because the K-State guy didn't have possession of the ball, when Bo Ellis hit him and they called the foul, the ball was dead at that point. So when he tapped the ball up and it went in, that was after the foul and it shouldn't count. He should get a bonus free throw, and the ball's not good. And he goes, "You're absolutely right." He takes the 2 points off the scoreboard. The guy hits 2 free throws. Marquette inbounds it, wins the game. And I'm at home. I was like, I couldn't move. I was just totally exhausted watching that. But that was the only time I've ever seen Al working a ref to his advantage on the court.
Yeah, I mean, that's amazing, and that just that puts the lie to the people that say, he was just a motivator and a BS artist, and I mean, if he knew rules on par or even better in that instance with game officials, then I mean, he paid attention. He knew what he was doing.
He knew what he was doing, and I think what he ended up doing was he wanted to give props to Hank Raymond's whenever he could, and he wanted to give props to Rick Majerus. So yes, he was delegating the Oklahoma City practices to those guys, but I think he knew his X's and O's, and when he needed to, he would step forward, because he played in the NBA, he coached at Belmont Abbey. And I asked him one time, you really trusted Hank Raymond's. In fact, Hank tells the story where you took the Marquette job, you hired Hank as a holdover from the Hickey era, and you gave him $30,000 in cash and told him and Jenny to go buy you a house. So that's a lot of trust. And he said, yeah, when I was at Belmont Abbey, we played Hank's team at Christian Brothers in Memphis, and he killed us. So I knew he could recruit and he could coach, because he killed our team. And he came into the locker room and gave me a $5,000 check, which was our gate receipt, and the check didn't bounce. So I knew he was a guy to be trusted.
Steve, we want to be respectful of your time. You've been incredible. JD, maybe you can finish up the historian that you are. Then I'd like to ask you briefly about the Dwayne Wade Final Four team and Shaka Smart's Golden Eagles. So JD, wrap her up.
Okay, just Marquette beats Wake Forest, and then they get to the Final Four. They play North Carolina, Charlotte, and then North Carolina. And did you attend those games, or did you go down to Atlanta?
Yeah. No, I was there. Yeah, I drove down. Flew down, and then drove back in a car full of all the students. So but I was at both those games. I had a great seat on press row. I mean, the media doesn't get those kind of seats by and large these days, but back then they had one whole side of the court had a 2 or 3 level table, and I saw that plain as day. I mean, the UNC Charlotte game, incredible finish, and then of course the championship game. I had roommates who were up in the stands at the Omni, and I knew they were having so much more fun than I was trying to play, Jimmy Olsen, Cub reporter down there at Press Row. But yeah, extremely, extremely memorable. What stands out for you, John?
Well, the final play, I think the greatest play in Marquette basketball history was the pass from Butch Lee to Bo Ellis. Said they were trying to make a Grant Hill to Christian Laettner pass. That's what they drew up in the huddle. And the ball came in too hot, and Cornbread Maxwell, who was guarding Whitehead, came up to Ellis at the free throw line, and they both tipped it to Whitehead, and the ball went up. And I've never seen a play where, did he make it before the 3 seconds?
Right.
Was it offensive goaltending? Was it defensive goaltending? What was it? And everybody kind of stood there, and Bo Ellis was jumping up and down, excited that they scored. What was your take? What was your take on the whole play?
Well, I remember the timeout, and Al went walking down all the way to the far end where they were going to be inbounding the ball. And as he explained afterward, he wanted to see where the scoreboard was, how far down it came, whether you could make a clean length of the court type of pass without hitting the scoreboard. And so, here he's stalking the sideline. You're like, what's he doing? Where's he going? And then he goes back in. And yeah, I mean, when the Grant Hill to Laettner play happened years later, it's like, well, yeah, that's probably what they preferred to do. But the way that ball bounced, beyond Bo and with Cornbread Maxwell and Jerome Whitehead, and Jerome guiding it in. And if I recall correctly, I mean, Al was on the scorer's table immediately, making sure that they determined it was in time. They didn't have coaches' challenges and things like that. And a lot of his forcefulness about the clock was a way to distract the officials from realizing that Whitehead might have been called for offensive goaltending with his hand or some part of his arm over the cylinder. So it was a misdirection thing. It's like, focus on the clock, and was the basket good? And it was. And don't let them even get into the issue of, well, maybe that should have been a offensive goaltending call. So, and then that led to the Monday night game. But I mean, that was the best game. And I remember Al, before the tournament began, he talked, I don't remember the exact numbers, but he talked about, if you're going to win a tournament, if you're going to win the championship, you've got to win 2 games by a total of 3 points, or 3 games by a total of 5 points, or something like that. And so between the K-State game and then that game, it seemed like he's looking like he's pretty smart about that formula.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But about 2 months after that, I was at a Rick Majerus playground camp with about 50 campers, and Jerome Whitehead, Bill Neary, and Dean Marquardt were there. And I went up to Jerome Whitehead and I said, all right, Jay, I know you've been asked this question before, but was it good? And he knew exactly what I was talking about. He goes, hey, I let it go, and they counted it. It had to be good. So that was
the
something.
Proof is
but
in the pudding.
Just talk about.
By the way,
oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. I was just going to. You mentioned Neary, and I've got to share one of my big bold columns for the Marquette Tribune during the season, and probably around the time they lost 3 straight games, was about how they've got to start Bernard Toone. Get Neary out of the starting lineup. He's not nearly as talented as Bernard. Bernard is, one of the best shooters Marquette's ever had. Neary is a ham and egger. And the campus picked up on that, and the crowds at the arena picked up on that. And you mentioned the Wichita State booing Neary, and during that, the final, days of that season, there was a tavern on campus, the Gym Bar, and my roommates and I would go there sometimes on weekend nights, and only weekend nights.
Yes,
And
of course.
right, and Neary and some of his buddies were in that bar at the same time, and I didn't notice it first off, but my roommate comes over to me and he says, "You got to get out of here." Well, what are you talking about? Bill Neary's over there. He might have had too much to drink. He's red in the face. He's angry, and he's throwing glasses and smashing them on the floor. And he's looking at you. And I'm like, he's a big guy. He's in shape. I was, a writer. And so my roommates, we hustle out the back door of the gym into the alley and get out of there that way. But yeah, Bill Neary was not pleased. And then at the rally after the whole season was over and the tournament and everything else, Neary, all the players went up there one by one to say a few words, and Neary said something along the lines of, I'm never going to forget this season for as long as I live, and I'm never going to forget that you booed me, he said to the crowd on campus in the mall. And Marquette students didn't let me down because they immediately booed him again. So, but it was good natured on their part, but it's sort of like you're going to call out the fans, they get to do that. But I never apologized to Neary, but what I have said before is I learned a lot about basketball from Al McGuire that year. And that was one of the things. It's not the 5 most talented guys that are going to win games. You need the right fit. You need guys to, the terminology these days is star in your role. And Neary was a mix master under the boards, and he was able to, give that team what it needed. It didn't need another guy who needed the basketball. And Bernard Toon was fine for that role coming in off the bench. And Al was right. I was wrong. I was, inexperienced, and they had the right mix. So hats off to Bill Neary.
Wow, was that fun. Steve Ashburner, brought to you by Moonlight Graham Modern Dental Benefits. Moonlight Graham, a proud sponsor of the MarquetteHoops.com basketball show, and our new sponsor, Sartori Cheese. You know of them, and Jim Sartori. We appreciate having them aboard. John, you've got a great website as we wrap up to chat about.
Sure, MarquetteHoops.com. It's part of the 24/7 CBS Digital Network, and we'll archive all of our previous shows and this show at the site. And if you'd like to be on our list for our free newsletter, please drop your email address in our widget. It's right on the front page. And please, if you could send out notices to all Marquette fans to tell them about our show.
Outstanding. Well, that's another edition of the MarquetteHoops.com basketball show. We hope you enjoy it, and we'll have many more. For John Dodds, our producer, Jason Ruck, I'm Tom Pippins. Thanks, everybody, and God bless you. We'll see you next time, and go Marquette.